Happy Valentines, everybody. This is Dr. Ashley with Mixtape Theology. And as I think about Valentine's Day and I think about this day of love, it reminds me of a huge 90s trend that I bet a lot of us experienced. True love waits. Now, I know that was a long time ago, and since then there's been a lot of debate and criticism of that program. Some people had great experiences. I can tell you for myself and my wife, even when we've been married almost 21 years, but my wife had a purity ring and had written a note to me from a commitment that she made, and us saving ourselves was a great blessing, and it was a result of that program. So I'm very thankful for it. But I also know that not everyone had that experience, that some people just had an experience of shame and guilt. And here's the big thing that was missing in a lot of those negative experiences: no gospel. And without the gospel, those commitments don't really mean anything. And so the gospel should be first and foremost. I'm not really here to debate whether or not you should do a True Love Waits program. If you want to see a good article by the creator of it, Richard Ross, telling why it's a good thing, you can look that up online and do it in the right way. But no matter what your experience could be, here's something I believe we can all agree on. That Jesus calls us to live pure lives, to remain sexually pure, and that Jesus defines what marriage should look like. Jesus said, for this reason, a man shall leave his father and mother and become one with his wife. Jesus quoting the Old Testament and really putting his definition of marriage there in the New Testament. And so we see a man and a woman come together and they become one flesh. And so this case of one flesh should only happen in a marriage union, and you become one physically and spiritually. I think we can all also agree that we should be teaching purity, sexual purity, to our kids and our grandkids, and helping them understand that God's way is the best way. Trusting in Jesus will always be the best way, and we'll regret it when we don't. But here's the one last thing I want to say. In lieu of True Love Waits, there's a great little section in Matt Chandler's book, The Explicit Gospel, and he talks about his experience in a True Love Waits program when he was in college. And he experienced what a lot of us experienced, where someone passed a rose around and every person touched it. And by the time it got to the end, the speaker held it up and it was all wilted and touched. And that speaker would say, "Now, who would want this dirty rose? Who would want this?" And then the students would sign a commitment card and maybe make that commitment out of guilt and shame and just not wanting to feel dirty. But the gospel was missing in a lot of those. You see, Jesus came to save, rescue, redeem, and restore the dirty rose. And that's all of us. You see, as we make these commitments, let's do them in God's grace, and let's let the gospel be first and foremost. The ultimate love that any of us have is the love that we have from Jesus. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. God demonstrated his love for us, that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. And the great words of Paul at the end of the love chapter, 1 Corinthians 13. But these three remain: faith, hope, and love. Abide in these. But the greatest of these is love. The greatest love any of us will ever experience is the fact that Jesus died for us because he loves us, the dirty roses, and he rose again, and in his resurrection we can have life, and trusting in his agape love and his life in us and his grace. Well, that's where we find purity, and that's where we find the grace and strength to do what God has called us to do. Happy Valentine's Day.